Have you ever felt like you were at war with yourself? A part of you reaches for the light, for goodness, for a higher purpose, while another part is relentlessly pulled toward fleeting pleasures, ambition, and habits you know are holding you back. This is not a modern struggle. It is an ancient war waged in the human heart, and one of its greatest chroniclers was a man who lived over 1600 years ago, a man whose journey from profound sin to profound sainthood continues to echo through the ages, offering hope to anyone who has ever felt lost. Our story begins not in the hallowed halls of a cathedral, but in the sun-baked town of Thagest in North Africa, part of the Roman Empire, in the year 354. Here, a boy named Aurelius Augustinus, whom we now know as Augustine, was born into a family of modest means but immense inner conflict. His mother, Monica, was a devout and patient Christian, praying constantly for her son's soul. His father, Patricius, was a pagan, a man of worldly ambition who saw in his brilliant son a path to status and success, a future as a celebrated orator and public figure. From his earliest days, Augustine was a prodigy. He possessed a mind of dazzling sharpness, a quick wit, and a burning curiosity about the world. His father scraped together every resource he could to provide Augustine with the best education possible, sending him to the nearby city of Madorus and later to the bustling metropolis of Carthage. Patricius dreamed of his son mastering rhetoric, the art of persuasive speech, which was the key to power and influence in the Roman world. He saw the intellect, but he did not see the soul. Carthage was a city of immense opportunity, and equally immense temptation. It was a vibrant hub of commerce, culture, and indulgence. For a teenager far from home, with a brilliant mind and raging hormones, it was a playground for the senses. Augustine, by his own later admission, plunged headfirst into this world. He sought validation in applause, meaning in romantic entanglements, and happiness in the theater and the rowdy company of his friends, a group he called the Wreckers for their disruptive and arrogant behavior. It was during this time that one of the most famous and psychologically telling events of his life occurred, the theft of some pears. He and his friends, late one night, stole a large quantity of pears from a neighbor's tree. They were not hungry. The pears were not even particularly good. They stole them simply for the thrill of the act itself, for the sheer joy of doing something forbidden. Later, Augustine would look back on this seemingly minor act of youthful delinquency with profound horror, seeing it as the perfect example of sin, an act done for no other reason than the love of wrongdoing itself. The intellectual pursuits in Carthage were matched by his pursuit of love, or what he thought was love. He entered into a long-term relationship with a woman whose name he never reveals in his writings. She was not of his social class, so they could not marry, but they lived together as husband and wife for over a decade. She bore him a son, a Deodatus, which means gift of God. Augustine loved them both deeply, yet he knew this relationship fell short of both social expectation and the moral standards his mother had taught him. Despite his wild living, Augustine's powerful mind could not rest. He was a top student, devouring literature and philosophy. One day, at the age of 19, he came across a book by the Roman orator Cicero called Hortensius. The book has since been lost to history, but its effect on Augustine was permanent and profound. For the first time, he felt a passionate, burning desire not just for knowledge or for pleasure, but for wisdom itself, for absolute truth. The spark of a new quest was lit within his restless soul. This newfound desire for truth led him away from the simple faith of his mother, which he saw as intellectually unsophisticated and filled with what he considered crude stories. He needed answers, logical explanations for the great questions of life, especially the problem of evil. If God is all good and all powerful, why is there so much suffering and wickedness in the world? This question tormented him, and it was a question that Christianity, as he understood it, could not satisfyingly answer for him at the time. It was in this state of intellectual and spiritual searching that he discovered a religious philosophy that seemed to have all the answers he craved: Manichaeism. This was a popular and sophisticated belief system that spread across the empire. It taught a radical dualism, the idea that the universe was a battleground between two eternal principles: a kingdom of light, which was the spiritual world of God, and a kingdom of darkness, which was the material world of evil. Human beings were particles of light trapped in bodies of darkness. Manichaeism was incredibly appealing to the young Augustine. It offered a clear, rational explanation for the problem of evil. Evil was not a corruption of good. It was a separate, independent substance. It also absolved him of personal responsibility for his sins. His lust, his pride, his worldly ambition, these were not truly his fault. They were the actions of the dark, material part of him, a force that was separate from his true, light-filled self. For nearly a decade, Augustine became a devoted follower and advocate of this faith. His career, meanwhile, continued its upward trajectory. He became a celebrated teacher of rhetoric, first in his hometown of Thagast, and then back in the great city of Carthage. He was successful, respected, and brilliant. Yet the inner turmoil did not cease. The promises of Manichaeism began to feel hollow. He found inconsistencies in its teachings about astronomy and science, and his intellectual integrity would not let him ignore them. He was told that all his questions would be answered by a great Manichaean leader named Faustus. When Augustine finally met Faustus, he was deeply disappointed. He found a man who was charming and well-spoken, but lacked any real intellectual depth or substance. Faustus could not answer any of Augustine's difficult questions. This encounter was a turning point. The intellectual foundation of his Manichaean faith crumbled, leaving him in a state of deep skepticism and spiritual despair. He had rejected his mother's faith, and now his adopted one had failed him. He was adrift, seeking new opportunities and hoping to escape the rowdy students of Carthage. Augustine made a bold move. Deceiving his own mother, who had followed him to Carthage and begged him not to go, he set sail for Rome under the cover of night. Monica was left weeping on the shore, praying for the son who was running further and further away from her and her God. In Rome, Augustine's career flourished, but so did his disillusionment. He found the students there to be more disciplined, but also more dishonest, often skipping out before paying their fees. His ambition was not yet quenched. A prestigious position opened up in Milan, the administrative capital of the Western Roman Empire at the time. He was to become the official professor of rhetoric for the imperial court. It was the pinnacle of his profession, a position of immense influence and prestige. He won the appointment and traveled to Milan, a successful, celebrated, yet profoundly unhappy man. He had wealth, fame, and intellectual renown, but the peace and truth he craved were more distant than ever. In Milan, two crucial figures were waiting for him, figures who would change the course of his life forever. The first was his relentless mother, Monica, who had crossed the sea to be with him again. The second was the Bishop of Milan, a man named Ambrose. Augustine began attending Ambrose's sermons not out of any interest in the faith, but as a professional rhetorician, to study the bishop's famous and powerful speaking style. He wanted to analyze the technique, not absorb the content. But Ambrose was unlike any Christian preacher Augustine had ever heard. He was a man of immense learning, deep intellect, and profound spirituality. He interpreted the Old Testament scriptures not just literally, which had always seemed crude to Augustine, but allegorically, revealing layers of philosophical and spiritual meaning that Augustine had never imagined. For the first time, Augustine saw that Christianity could be intellectually robust and coherent. The faith he had dismissed as simple was in fact profoundly deep. His intellectual barriers to Christianity began to fall, but the moral and personal barriers remained stronger than ever. His ambition still burned brightly. He was arranging a socially advantageous marriage, which required him to cruelly send away the mother of his son, his faithful companion of 15 years. This act broke his heart, and he wrote that the wound it left in him was deep and bleeding. To numb the pain while he waited 2 years for his bride to come of age, he took another mistress. He was now in a state of extreme inner conflict. His mind was increasingly convinced of the truth of Christianity, but his will was chained to his habits of lust and ambition. He described this state as having two wills, one old and one new, one carnal and one spiritual, warring within him and tearing his soul apart. He wanted to change. He desperately wanted to be free, but he felt powerless to break the chains of his own past. He prayed a famous, conflicted prayer: "Lord, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet." One day, a friend named Pontianus visited Augustine and told him the story of Saint Anthony of the Desert, a man who had given up everything to follow God. He also told him about two young men, officials at the imperial court, who had read the life of Anthony and were so moved that they immediately abandoned their promising careers to become monks. The story struck Augustine like a physical blow. These uneducated men could seize a new life, while he, the great intellectual, remained trapped and paralyzed by his own indecision. Overwhelmed with shame and inner turmoil, Augustine fled from his friend into a small garden adjoining his house. A storm of weeping overcame him. He threw himself down under a fig tree, crying out to God, "How long, Lord? Will you be angry forever? Remember not our past sins." He felt torn apart, berating his own will for its refusal to obey the commands of his mind. He was in the depths of a spiritual and psychological crisis, completely broken. It was in this moment of utter despair that he heard a child's voice chanting from a nearby house, a sing-song voice repeating the words, "Toll, liege." Toll, liege. This means take up and read. Take up and read. Augustine was stunned. He could not recall any children's game that used such a phrase. He interpreted the voice as a divine command. He stood up, returned to the spot where he had left his friend, and picked up the book of the letters of St. Paul that was lying there. He opened the book at random, and his eyes fell upon a passage from the letter to the Romans. It read, "Not in reveling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires." As he read these words, he later wrote, "A light of serenity infused his heart, and all the darkness of doubt vanished away." The war was over. The struggle had ceased. In that moment, he surrendered his will completely. He calmly told his friend what had happened, and then he went to his mother, Monica, to tell her the news she had been praying for her entire adult life. Her sorrow was turned into a joy deeper than she had ever hoped for. Augustine immediately resigned from his prestigious teaching position. The career he had pursued with such relentless ambition now meant nothing to him. His one desire was to serve the God he had finally found. A few months later, at the Easter Vigil in the year 387, Augustine, along with his beloved son Deodatus and his close friend Alypius, was baptized by Bishop Ambrose in the Cathedral of Milan. The intellectual giant, the celebrated orator, the man of the world, humbly entered the waters of baptism, emerging as a new creation. His long and painful journey through pleasure, philosophy, and skepticism had finally led him home. With his new life begun, Augustine planned to return to Africa with his mother and son to live a quiet life of prayer and study. They traveled to the port city of Ostia near Rome to await their ship. There, standing at a window overlooking a garden, he and Monica had a profound conversation, their souls soaring as they spoke of the eternal life of the saints. It was a moment of perfect peace and shared understanding. Just 5 days later, Monica fell ill with a fever, and within 9 days she died, her life's purpose fulfilled. Augustine was devastated by her loss, but he returned to his hometown of Thagest in Africa. There he sold his inheritance, gave the money to the poor, and established a small lay monastic community with his friends. He wanted nothing more than to live a life of quiet contemplation, study of the scriptures, and writing. But God had other plans for this brilliant and transformed mind. His reputation for wisdom and holiness began to spread throughout the region. On a visit to the port city of Hippo, Augustine went to the church to hear the bishop speak. The aging bishop, Valerius, spoke to the congregation about his urgent need for a priest to help him in his ministry. The congregation, who knew of Augustine and his reputation, suddenly seized him. Despite his protests and tears, they presented him to the bishop, demanding that he be ordained. Reluctantly, feeling the call of God through the will of the people, Augustine agreed. His quiet life was over. A few years later, upon the death of Valerius, he was consecrated as the new bishop of Hippo. For the next 35 years, he would serve this city as a shepherd, a preacher, a judge, and a theologian. He preached almost daily, wrote tirelessly against the heresies of his time, and cared for the poor and needy of his flock. The man who once sought his own glory now spent every ounce of his energy for the glory of God and the good of others. From this relatively small city in North Africa, Augustine's influence would shape the next 1,000 years of Western thought. He wrote hundreds of works, but 2 stand out above all others. The first is his Confessions, an intensely personal and revolutionary work in which he tells the story of his own conversion, addressed directly to God. It is both a masterpiece of literature and a profound exploration of the human soul's search for its creator. His other great masterpiece is The City of God, a monumental work he wrote in the wake of the sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410. As the Roman Empire crumbled around him, Augustine presented a vision of human history as a struggle between 2 cities, the earthly city, built on love of self, and the heavenly city, built on the love of God. It was a work that gave hope and a new way of understanding the world to a generation that felt their civilization was ending. Augustine died in the year 430, as the Vandals, another barbarian tribe, were besieging the city of Hippo. He spent his final days in prayer and repentance, with the penitential psalms posted on the walls around his bed. The world he had known was passing away, but the legacy he built was just beginning. The restless seeker had found his rest, and in doing so, he created a roadmap that countless others would follow for centuries to come. So what does this story of a man from a long-dead empire have to do with us today in our world of smartphones, social media, and constant distraction? Everything. Augustine's story is the story of the modern soul. We, too, are pulled in 1,000 different directions. We pursue happiness in careers, in relationships, in possessions, in online validation, just as he pursued it in the arenas and lecture halls of the Roman Empire. We build our identities around our achievements and our desires. We also wrestle with the great questions. We see suffering and injustice in the world and ask where God is. We are drawn to sophisticated ideologies or simple cynicism that seems to explain the world's brokenness. Like Augustine with Manichaeism, we can find temporary comfort in systems that place the blame for darkness somewhere else, that tell us our struggles are not entirely our fault. But these answers often leave our hearts as empty as they found them. Augustine's struggle with his will is perhaps the most relatable part of his entire journey. Who among us has not known what the right thing to do is, yet felt powerless to do it? Who has not made a resolution to change, only to fall back into the same old habits, the same comfortable patterns? His feeling of being chained, of being at war with himself, is a deeply human experience. His story reminds us that this battle is not a sign of failure, but a sign of a soul that is still alive and fighting for something more. His transformation was not achieved through sheer willpower. It was not a self-help program. The final change happened only when he reached a point of complete surrender, when he admitted his own powerlessness and allowed a higher power to act. His story is a testament to the power of grace, the idea that the ultimate healing and freedom in our lives come not from our own striving, but as an unearned gift. It came to him through the persistent prayers of a mother, the wise words of a mentor, and a mysterious voice in a garden. Furthermore, Augustine's life shows that our past does not have the final say. The man who had been a slave to his passions became one of history's greatest champions of divine love. The man whose pride led him to dismiss the scriptures became their most profound interpreter. The man who ran from God and broke his mother's heart became a spiritual father to millions. His life is the ultimate proof that no one is beyond transformation, that our greatest mistakes and deepest wounds can become the very places where grace does its most powerful work. His journey teaches us the importance of honest searching. Augustine never settled for easy answers. His mind was constantly questioning, probing, and seeking. It was this relentless intellectual honesty that led him out of Manichaeism and ultimately brought him to a faith that satisfied both his mind and his heart. He shows us that faith is not the enemy of reason. Rather, true faith is the destination that reason, when pursued honestly and courageously, is ultimately seeking. The story of St. Augustine is a beacon of hope. It tells us that it is okay to be restless, to be broken, to be at war with ourselves. It tells us that our deepest longings for truth, for love, and for meaning are not random desires. They are a compass placed within us, pointing us toward our true home. Augustine's entire life, with all its messy detours and painful struggles, was ultimately a journey toward a single, profound realization. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you.